I remember distinctly that there was a meeting with Eden, at which he said, well, we've got to bring the army in immediately.
I want 40,000 troops moved across the desert tonight.
It's not possible, sir.
What do you mean?
They hadn't made the necessary logistical arrangements. You can't just move an army at the twinkling of an eye. And he was absolutely furious, very, very violently furious.
It would really take 3 days to achieve
3 days? For a journey that would take me 3 hours in an ordinary vehicle? Well, what the hell is your army doing while our civilians are being murdered?
Nasser and the free officers now saw their chance. The rioting of Black Saturday was the starting gun of the revolution, the cue for toppling the corrupt King Farouk and the eventual removal of the British. During the riots, King Farouk had remained in the Abdin Palace, but he looked on and did nothing.
People had been hating Farouk for a long time because of the way he ruled the country, the way he had the corrupt people around him, the way his depravity when it came to women and other things.
He used to come and play cards at our apartment, at our flat in Cairo. My mom told me he used to cheat at cards. My mother had a full house in poker. And he just put his cards down and he said, I have 4 kings. And you didn't dare tell the king, show us the cards, of course. And so, in fact, he had 3 kings. And when they asked him, why did you say you had 4 kings? He said, I'm the 4th.
Just before midnight, Nasser and his fellow army officers made their move. They arrested their own commanders and laid siege to the king's palace.
It was scary. It was just scary, but we were young and carefree. It was a peaceful revolution. They just took the king out, and they actually sent him away on his yacht with his money and gave him a 21-gun salute as his yacht left the port of Alexandria.
Some were hugging the soldiers. Others were climbing onto the armoured vehicles, and they were chanting, ecstatic.
The revolution was inevitable, and its success was due to its principles and the excellent leadership of Abdel Nasser.
The Revolutionary Command Council was now established under Mohammed Naguib. The real power behind the coup was Gamal Abdel Nasser. With Egyptian hostility mounting and financial pressures at home, Eden realized it was no longer practical to maintain the huge military presence in Suez.
We could undoubtedly deal effectively with any immediate attempt by Egypt to eject us by force from the Canal Zone. But the situation which this would create would almost certainly compel us to reoccupy Egypt, with all the consequences which this would entail. We should have all world opinion against us, and we'd find it difficult to make our case if Egypt took us to the United Nations. It is hard to see what future there is for such a policy. We cannot afford to keep 80,000 men indefinitely in the Canal Zone.
The cost was huge, gigantic, keeping 80,000 troops there. We had all these permanent sterling crises, and the Treasury must have been desperate to cut down.
So Eden, ever the diplomat, took the momentous decision to negotiate with Nasser's revolutionary regime for the withdrawal of British troops from the canal. But this decision was met with fury and resistance by a group of conservative politicians known as the Suez Group.
That Suez is basic and vital to the economic survival of our nation and the nations of the Commonwealth.
Giving up the canal base was seen as surrendering British imperial power.
There was this group of MPs around Julian Emery and Charles Waterhouse and so on, who
objected that we were sacrificing something of great importance and that we were in danger of undermining our position in the Middle East. I've no doubt they were wrong, but they did have a certain amount of support in the Conservative Party. And this meant that when Eden concluded the agreement with Nasser, he paid a certain political price.
Eden clashed furiously with Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who was unwilling to see Britain lose its control in Suez. This disagreement with Churchill was made worse by the fact that Eden was the known Prime Minister in waiting, but that Churchill was still clinging on to office in his 79th year.
The one occasion I do remember, which was at Chartwell. Eden had come to stay for the weekend, and he was sitting with Churchill in the study. And I remember Churchill looking at him and saying, "Why do you look at me with hungry eyes? You're not yet 60. And the look of total despair just crossed Eden's face. He never answered. And then he went out of the room. There was no way he could get past the implacable determination of Churchill to stay in office.
In the summer of 1952, Eden enhanced his glamorous reputation by marrying Clarissa, Churchill's niece.
And here's the bride. She's wearing an orchid pink dress. It's silk shantung with a large spray of orchids instead of a bouquet. At Caxton Hall, where they'll be married, Mr. Eden faces the barrage of cameras. And if you want proof of the gaiety and joy of this occasion for us all, just listen to the crowd.
As Nasser's reputation as the figurehead of Arab nationalism was growing, the world began to take note. Now both East and West were wooing him. One American diplomat began to forge links with a glamorous new strongman in the Middle East.
Nasser really liked Esther Williams' films, so we had some in the embassy in the Cultural Affairs Department. So I arranged to borrow a projector and a screen, and several times when he came we would put it up at the end of the living room and we'd sit there and watch Esther Williams be sporting herself in the pools and so on. She was quite a sleek lady in her swimsuit. It was a perfectly, innocent sort of thing, but it was outside his usual realm of exposure, I should say. Nasser and his friends would like to have hot dogs when they came to the house. So the first meal that he had with us was hot dogs, when we were able to get all beef hot dogs from the embassy commissaries. Nasser and I would get out on the balcony together to talk about what he was concerned about. It wasn't like that he wanted to replace British ties with American ties. It was a feeling that we could be a sort of honest broker between the two. I guess we sort of operate on the theory that it really was time for the British to move along and give up this idea of military presence in Egypt.
In a bid to hasten the British withdrawal, Egyptian insurgents stepped up the pressure, not only targeting the troops, but also their families. They were no longer safe, even in their homes.
Imagine you get up and you're in an atmosphere where people detest you and want to destroy you. And you find a dagger and a pamphlet in your bedroom threatening to harm your child. Through these pamphlets, we were able to put pressure on the troops.